Good evening, and welcome to the Atlanta Suburban Alumni Chapter's Mental Health Webinar Series. Tonight's topic will be No Superwoman Here. Step away from being the strong Black woman. Tonight on our panel, we have Dr. Shay and Dr. Joya with us to give us some tips on how to step away from being the strong Black woman. I know that we're used to playing these roles and we're used to carrying this S on our chest, but I am very interested and I am very, very, very eager to hear what our panelists have to say and what questions that you all have for us. So please enjoy this conversation. And our moderator for this evening will be Sora Nadia Barnett.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This conversation is meant to be very interactive, so we are going to be looking for your participation. First, I want to start off by just reading a few lyrics from Alicia Keys' song, Superwoman, just to set the tone to this concept that historically has been a place of pride and strength. So the chorus to her song Superwoman says, "'Cause I'm a superwoman, yes I am, yes she is. Still when I'm a mess, I still put on a vest with an S on my chest, oh yes, I'm a superwoman." So just to give a foundation and just to kind of get us all in the frame of reference of as women, mothers, daughters, sisters, friends, sorors who go out into the world, we have responsibilities, and the idea that we should take pride and we should support each other in the midst of our own individual, or regardless of our own individual spaces where we are. We should still put on our best. We should still represent a superwoman despite being a mess on the inside. So to start us off with a question for both panelists, what is a superwoman? How can we conceptualize what this is, just to continue to give a foundation for what we are really talking about?
Sure. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Joya Hampton Anderson, and I am an assistant professor at Emory School of Medicine. So the strong Black womanhood schema is actually a research term. This has been extensively studied in the clinical psychological literature to describe this phenomenon, most often by African-American women, that's namely not asking for help, working in the face of adversity, going until you can't anymore. At the surface, this appears to be a good thing, right? If we're getting things done, we're checking those boxes, we're often at service for others and helping our families and things like that. But then the question becomes, at what cost? Right? And oftentimes there are negative physical and mental health outcomes associated with this strong Black womanhood schema because of the lack of attention to self-care. So that's kind of what the literature says about that term.
Absolutely. And good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Shay. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I love the fact that you started out with the song lyrics, because it definitely gets us to kind of conceptualize what that means and how we play that role. And I think that's the important thing we need to realize. It is a role. She said we put on the vest, which means that if we put it on, we can also take it off. And I think the problem becomes when we feel as if we have to wear this vest 24/7, when we and or others feel as if and expect us to wear the vest 24/7. I don't think that there is an issue itself with being proud that we are resilient. And I wonder if we could maybe reframe and kind of break down the terminology, maybe use super as an adjective. not Superwoman as a noun. Because when we do that, we take on this role as if we are invincible. And we give ourselves a hard time when we have to admit that we're tired and overwhelmed and resentful.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, this idea, this concept, is definitely one that you, as you both mentioned, it can be reflective on yourselves, but it also can create a reflection on how you want other people to see you. And so, coming to terms with the reality of who you are. Is it really a bad thing to not want to be a physical example of strength in our ability to multitask in today's world?
Sure. So I think what it comes down to is that internal check-in, right? So if we are actively moving in the direction of our values and goals, and we feel like we are eating well and sleeping well and balancing all of the things and feeling like things are even keeled, sure, absolutely. But the problem often comes when we start to feel kind of off kilter, right? So are our physical bodies not feeling all the way they should be? Are we having symptoms of burnout or overwhelming stress, right? So difficulty concentrating. Maybe you're having trouble balancing all the things that you used to balance. Maybe you're feeling a little bit more withdrawn than you normally are, right? Are you having a change of functioning from where you were at baseline? Right? Those are the signals where you might want to take a pause and do a self-assessment, right? Of, have things gone a little too far? Where can I pull back so that I can continue to contribute to the world in the way that makes sense to me and that makes me feel good, and I'm able to maintain my health at the same time?
And I think we have to think about the cultural and historical factors, because this is not always a role that we have chosen, right? We've been put in this position way back when, and so we have to think about how a lot of our identity has been wrapped up into being this selfless, strong person, almost superhuman. And I think that's the part that we forget. We are not fictional characters on a television show or a movie. We are human. And so we have to find ways to recharge. And to piggyback on what you said, Dr. Joya, if we would only think about it as such, oftentimes if we're going to go on a road trip, we fill up our tank, we check the tires, we get an oil change, we make sure the engine's running properly, because we know we have this journey, we know we have this task at hand. And so we need to pause long enough and honor ourselves enough to be able to find ways to do a self-assessment, a self-check. Do I have the time for this? Do I have the energy for this? Do I have the space for this? What is the risk of me doing this in spite of?
Mm-hmm. That's a great point, Dr. Shea. I think thinking about the sociocultural context is really important. And because of that context, this work, what Dr. Shea outlined, has to be so intentional. And that's one of the things that come up a lot with the patients that I work with, right? We're going against what society is telling us we have to do or should be as Black women sometimes, right? So it's easy to just fall into the status quo. So to do something different requires a lot of self-awareness and a lot of intentionality to make those changes.
Absolutely. And let me say, before we go any further, I have been very excited about this topic. I experienced this, the the dissonance between appreciating being complimented, as someone in the chat mentioned. It can be a compliment if someone says, oh, you're a superwoman, oh, you're so strong. But then the realization of what that means for me to live that, to exemplify that. And I got ahead of myself. So I want to just kind of take a pause here to introduce our panel. So we have, as Dr. Joya Hampton Anderson mentioned, she's a clinical psychologist and assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Emory University School of Medicine. She's received her undergrad and master's degree from Vanderbilt University, her doctorate in clinical psychology from Emory University, and completed a postdoc fellowship at Emory University School of Medicine. Her program of research aims at understanding the social and cultural determinants of health disparities and chronic stress. She's interested in risk and protective factors that influence mental and physical health, diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment, with specific interest in culturally, clinical practice and research. Dr. Hampton clinically works with youth and families using an empirically supported, collaborative, culture-responsive approach to treatment. She enjoys connecting with communities about her work via writing and talks such as this. Thank you so much, SOAR, Dr. Hampton Anderson. And we have SOAR, Dr. Thomas, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist, as she mentioned, an approved clinical supervisor and owner of a private practice called Dr. Shay Speaks, LLC. She has worked in the mental health field for 20 years and in the higher education, higher ed academia for 8 years. She specializes in work-life balance, grief, caregivers, relationship well-being, diversity, family businesses, and sports and entertainment, family concerns. She is also a distinguished core part-time professor for North Central University Online, which is an accredited marriage and family therapist program. As a consultant, writer, and speaker, Dr. Shay offers services to nonprofits, churches, schools, hospitals, and media outlets. She has self-published 2 volumes of poetry, Alex Shay Collections, Volume 1, Love, Life, Loss, and New Life, and Alex Shay Collection, Volume 2, Grief, Growth, Grace, and Gratitude. Thank you so much, sorors, for being here as our panel. And this will lead us into continuing our conversation. We do have our first question from the audience, which both of you are well equipped to handle, which is, how do we recalibrate relationships that were established with us in the role as a spouse, children, coworkers? I know as this this participant put this question in, I can completely relate to that in terms of reestablishing your relationship to create boundaries.
Absolutely. Oftentimes in couple and family therapy, and even sometimes in individual sessions, when I am working with clients trying to wrap their heads around all of the many hats they wear and roles that they play, I think we don't realize how patterns are set, right? We do things, we operate in a system, and if the roles and rules have been established, then it takes some time to change. And that requires a lot. It requires, again, that self-awareness piece on the individual side. Also, it requires a certain openness to being able to either ask for help or accept help. And that is often coupled with this notion of everybody expects you to do it because you always have and because you do it so well. And guess what? You do it with a smile on your face looking good. Then why would the system want to change? And so one of the things when you're talking about couples, families, friends, co-workers, supervisors even, we have to acknowledge our humanness, know and feel comfortable setting healthy boundaries after we've checked in with ourselves.
Absolutely. And I'll add that process might feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. I feel like that's often a conversation that comes up in the therapeutic setting. When you change that system, it's going to feel uncomfortable for everyone at first. and then people adjust, right? So the people you work with will adjust, your family will adjust to your new boundaries, right? So it's really about being brave enough to take that first step, to try something different, sitting with that discomfort in service of more sustainable change.
And I like to use our masks, that we're wearing during this pandemic as a metaphor or an analogy. We wear all kinds of masks. I say this frequently in my talks. And sometimes we have to take off the mask of invincibility. And we have to have a certain amount of bravery, as Dr. Joya mentioned, and also vulnerability to realize that we too are worthy of the love and the care that we give others. We do very much consider it a badge of honor. And I'm not just talking to y'all, I'm talking to myself too. Because I often have to remind myself of this, and my circle, people in my circle who know this about me and my personality have to remind me of the same thing. And so it does take work, but the outcome is so worth it. One of my favorite phrases is, if you replace the I in illness with we, it's wellness. And so one of the benefits of making sure that we're not walking around like we are, void of hurt and pain and sickness is we acknowledge that we are vulnerable and tired and we need help at times. And that's okay. It's not a character defect, and it's not the end of the world for other people. It just requires a different set of roles and rules.
Absolutely. And you both mentioned the human part of our existence and being able to recognize that. We have a question that came from Facebook in reference to this idea of work-life balance. Does that really exist? And if it does, what are some tips or actions needed for this balance? Or maybe the focus is about the balance and not necessarily the work and the life and the balance. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yes. And I'll echo Dr. Shea. I think we're all here working on what we're talking about today. So everything that I'm saying, I'm working on as well. But I'll share that I had a mentor share with me that maybe work-life synergy is a better term. Right? Because balance implies that there is, again, something that we're trying to reach just perfectly. And maybe the answer is, how do work and life kind of work together seamlessly where we don't feel that overwhelm, right? That might mean on some weeks we're really family oriented and that's taking priority because of what we have going on. Maybe some weeks are more work heavy and that's okay, right? Because that's a time limited space, and then we'll get back to the other things, right? So I think that term has really helped me be a little bit more flexible with my approach to how I balance work, well, how I make work and life go together, right? So some of these things are kind of shifting how we think about how we go about life in this way.
Excellent point. I've actually heard that some people refer to it as finding your rhythm as opposed to balance. And I like that because particularly in marriage and family therapy, we talk a lot about doing a dance. And it reminds me of I think it's an African proverb, when the music changes, so does the dance. And so to your point, absolutely, there may be certain times or seasons where it's your busy season and you have back-to-back events or back-to-back, family things going on. You have to balance that with your rest and your rejuvenation. And so balance isn't always 50-50. Balance isn't always 40 hours a week of work and 20 hours a week of this, and it's not this picture perfect thing. And so knowing how you recharge, I use the example with the car. It's the same thing with like our cell phones and our computers. If our signal is low, and if we don't charge it, it's not going to work. And we have to realize that. That's a way to kind of practically think about our humanness. And so when you're trying to find balance, that first step is, again, that self-assessment, that self-check, and having a circle of people around you, even if it's one or two, who can also recognize that about you and say, like, let me do this for you, or what would be helpful? And so that also helps you find a new rhythm, find a new dance, because you may be dealing with a different circumstance.
Yeah, I also think as we all work towards this work-life synergy or finding our rhythm, right, being kind to ourselves as we do that. So oftentimes we bring about more stress by the way we think about how we're doing, right? So maybe things this week didn't go as we had planned, and maybe we're talking negatively to ourselves, or maybe dwelling on what went wrong, and then there's more stress for us that is kind of wearing us down. So allowing self-compassion and grace for our efforts, and recognizing that we're all just doing the best that we can is really important.
Absolutely. And, you know, this rhythm that we're speaking of, the synergy, leads to the next question that one of our participants has shared, which is related to for all, you know, all of us here, in terms of all of you have terminal degrees. So the question came, how did you all find your rhythm or synergy with your regular lives? I only read a little bit about your professional life. So, you know, we can all imagine everything that you had to balance in working towards your doctoral degree. But how did you find how did you not balance? How did you find your synergy? How did you find your rhythm during that time for yourselves?
I had the pleasure of earning my doctorate in a city where there was a beach, and I think that was life-saving, because one of the ways that I like to recharge and rejuvenate myself is in nature, and particularly I love water. So I would even sometimes study on the beach, or if it was raining and not, hurricane season or something, on my patio, so finding a way to kind of do both, but also knowing when to put the laptop down, put the computer down, step out of the library, study in a group, but then also maybe go grab lunch or a cup of tea or something afterwards. And so I think it was finding one or two people that were kind of like-minded in some of the things we enjoyed doing together, but also being very astute in our studies, but just trying to be well-rounded. And again, being each other's accountability partner.
Absolutely. I'll echo that. While earning my doctorate, my social support system was everything. I mean, those are the people who know exactly what you're going through academically, right? And the workload is so great that you need those people who know exactly what it's like. So I really leaned on my support system, and that was great for me during graduate school. Now I am an early career faculty member. So this is my second year on faculty at Emory, and I'm also a new mom. I have a 4-month-old. So this work-life synergy, I'm living it every day, trying to figure out working mom life as still being a new faculty member. And I feel like every day is kind of trial and error, right? I'm trying new things. I'm figuring out what systems work for us, what works for me. So that self-compassion and grace point is one that I'm working on during this time of great transition. I'll also say that being really clear on your values and priorities has been really helpful, right? So I have certain professional goals I'm working towards, personal goals, right? And then anything that doesn't fall into that, I don't prioritize, right? So that I think helps keep focus, and also make sure that your plate might be full, but maybe it's not full of things that aren't directly serving the values that you're holding dear right now.
Yes, and thank you, you both, for sharing that. I can agree with the nature and needing that space to kind of really clear your mind and really reset. And Dr. Joya being a mom, I actually was a mom in my doctoral program, and one of the things that I struggled with was feeling guilty. I felt guilty that I was a mom and I was doing something such as going to school, which I conceptualized as a selfish act. I was being selfish because I'm going for a goal for myself while I am a new mom. And so guilt is something that we had a couple of questions that has come up about dealing with feeling guilty. How do you manage, or what can we do in terms of strategies when it comes to feeling guilty, whether you're a new mom or not? The fact that you are working towards your own personal goal that does not benefit anyone but yourself, how do you work through, and this could be for self-care that benefits yourself. So how do you deal, or what can we do to bypass the feelings of guilt when we want to create these boundaries? We want to do these things for ourselves. We know we need to recharge, but we feel like, oh, we're taking time away from caring for others, doing things for others, doing things for work that could be helpful to other people.
I like what Dr. Joya said about giving yourself some grace. And I talk about that to many clients. I call it the guilt monster. And when that guilt monster jumps on your back, you have to really brace yourself and kind of realize what falls under the category of irrational thoughts and what falls under the category of not, again, back to our title with being Superwoman, we are human. We are the consummate caregivers. And so it makes sense that we struggle at times wanting to take that cape off, get that S off of our chest, take that mask off, because it's so much a part of our identity. And if we remember that our value is wrapped up in who we are and not what we do, and that the people that we love and care for so much want us to be the recipient of some of that oftentimes. And it's the old story when you get on the airplane about if the, cabin pressure drops, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. If you take a lot of pride in being a caregiver, there is nothing wrong with that. But we have to realize that if we don't sustain ourselves and take care of ourselves first, we are not as effective. We are not as compassionate, maybe. We are not as patient. We are not as kind and as efficient. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with being wrapped up in the love and the gratitude and the satisfaction that we get from giving, but we have to put it in context.
Absolutely. And along with that, self-efficacy and mastery building activities are integral to mental health as well. So not only is sleep important and eating and all of those things, but it's also doing things that make us feel good and make us feel proud of ourselves. That's what's going to make us the best version of ourselves to then be there for our loved ones in the best way that we can.
Thank you so much. In thinking about this construct of the strong Black woman, and there have been celebrities such as Taraji P. Henson, who is trying to get away from being called a strong Black woman because of what that entails, this idea that we are superhuman beings that don't need rest, don't need to re-energize, we can just go like the Energizer Bunny. How detrimental is this concept, this strong Black woman? Is it really something that a person should strive to not place on Big Mom, or the grandmother holding down the family? As Dr. Thomas mentioned, this historically has been a phrase, an identity that's placed on Black women. And there's, on one hand, we are raved and applauded for demonstrating certain skills and abilities and endurance. And then on the other hand, it's leading to increased physical illnesses.
Sure. Well, yeah. So I feel like that term, whatever you're comfortable with using, it's fine. It's how you feel,
Mhm.
right? So I think it's that internal self-check that's most important. If you are walking around with the strong Black womanhood flag waving high, but you're breaking down on the inside, that's no good, right? That's no good for anyone, and certainly not for you. However, if you feel like you can carry that term in a way that, and you're feeling like you're healthy, and you're thriving, I'd see no problem with that.
Absolutely. It's all about the language and the meaning.
Yeah.
And one of the benefits of knowing yourself, knowing your boundaries, knowing your values is also being able to assess that based on other people's expectations. Again, if you take pride and you have personal fulfillment in this caregiving, and you're not depleting yourself and ignoring your own physical, mental, spiritual, relational, financial health, then it's okay. And it doesn't have to be either or. We don't have to put the cape on the shelf forever, or say, or take away the value and the sense of pride that we feel. Rather, we just have to realize that, again, I think it can be an adjective, not a noun. So yes, we are strong, we are Black, we are women, but what does this really mean, strong Black woman? What's connected to all of that? What are the expectations? What are the assumptions that are made, and how do we check that out? You know, even if we want to think of ourselves, and even if we, and I'm not a big guru for all of the like Batman, Superman, all of that, but even if we're trying to put ourselves on that pedestal, we have to remember they were, what is it, Bruce Wayne and Lois Lane, and they had a suit that also they put on and took off, and they, you know, so if you want to be superhuman, superhero, that's fine, but guess what? You better know your kryptonite, or it's going to sneak up on you and have you lying flat on your back.
Mm-hmm.
That is a really good point in reference to knowing your, it sounds like what we're saying is really looking at this idea, how do we see ourselves, and understanding seeing ourselves as human is the healthiest thing that we can do. And once we've done some self-evaluation, then it's time for the action, right? And the action is both internal and external. And so internally, we've talked about self-care. We've talked about identifying those spaces where you can, where it's you know, maybe easy for you to excel and be quote unquote super, because that might be a space that comes natural to you. And it's okay in areas where you struggle, that you're not. But in terms of externally, we're now getting into setting boundaries, right? How do we, let's start in the home. How do we create new boundaries in our home with our families after we've done this self-analysis, this self-evaluation? We've identified those activities of self-care that we have found really helps us to recharge and to refresh, to move forward. How do we communicate that in our home with our loved ones and our kids and our spouses?
You want me to take that one first, Dr. Joya?
We'll have the marriage and family therapist start, and I will pick up.
Yeah, so it's difficult, and I want to honor that. It's difficult not only because of the expectations that are placed upon us, but the way we see ourselves. And very practically, that's going to look different depending on your circumstance. You know, it can be something such as, hey, babe, I don't feel like cooking tonight. Can you pick up something before you come home? Or it can be, hey, honey, you're getting a little older. I'm going to need you to sort your clothes and take them to the washer, or let me show you how to wash dishes because mommy needs to do XYZ. Or I know that I always take my sister to get her hair done every Friday at 2:00, but guess what? I need to go to the doctor because I've been putting it off, or I need to study for this exam. And so can you ask somebody else? Or I know I've been paying your light bill for the past couple of months, but I'm going to give you until about May 15th to come up with another plan, because it's really just overwhelming for me right now.
Absolutely. I think the theme there is clear communication. We cannot assume that people know the internal changes that we're making. And I would actually probably say over communication when we're setting these boundaries, right? So being very clear within the home, I'm actually trying to work on more work-life synergy, finding things that I really enjoy because I've been feeling stressed lately. Because of that, I won't be cooking on Fridays anymore, and I won't be doing this, right? So really spelling it out, and that gives people room to adjust when all of the information has been laid out there. So really, again, putting that brave hat on and being very clear about what changes are to come. And then understanding that, change is difficult for everyone, so it might bear repeating sometimes, and that's okay, right? Until people get into the new routine.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that realizations that I have had to come to in my own personal journey is two things in reference to change. One, as we mentioned, change is difficult, and the least path of resistance is to not change and keep doing the same thing. And two, that your family that loves you unconditionally, and you know that, and you feel that, also have their own intentions and they have their own needs. And so even my 9-year-old, who knows after, a certain time of the day, he has to go and ask his dad questions because I'm tired of him asking me questions all day, he will still always come and ask me questions. And I have to divert him back to, you passed your dad up to come and talk to me. Please go back and ask your dad. And so just recognizing that it's no sign for, it can be received as disrespectful. They're not respecting your boundaries, but your boundaries are your responsibility to maintain and not others. So, in talking about setting boundaries with your family, your kids in the home, how does that reflect on boundaries on extended families and members and friends? So kind of moving outside the home, and then we'll go on to coworkers in that space.
Sure, absolutely. I think extended family can be difficult, particularly in African American culture. We have a very hierarchical family structure, right? So no matter where you are in the family, there's someone above you, so to speak, right? And we all value respect of our elders and things like that. And in my clinical experience, that becomes very difficult, right, to make changes there. And at the same time, we deserve to be taken care of. So those same rules can apply. How do we communicate respectfully to some of our extended family members that you expect to be making changes so that you take care of yourself and still kind of be around and be able to help family the way you would like to, right? And again, really, really difficult conversation, particularly when we start thinking about elders and extended family, but something that I think is worth, our health.
Absolutely. And I think thinking about the timing and the tone, and, it doesn't always have to come out when you're frustrated. And I think sometimes that's why messages get lost in translation, because we hold it in, and then it's like, I'm tired of this, do this, I'm not going to do this anymore. If we can think about an ideal time to have a realistic, straightforward conversation with some goals, then we can figure out, okay, if it's going to be with my mom or my dad, then because of my relationship with them and because of their personality, I need to handle it this way. If it's a sibling, I need to handle it this way. If it's an elder, a grandparent, a godparent, an older aunt or uncle, you can adjust accordingly. Cousins, friends, sorors, church members, pastors, all of that, supervise, we'll talk about the other branches of the system later, but I think the same principles apply. And if you have a certain sense of conviction about prioritizing your own health and wellness, you'll be very intentional about your messaging, and other people have no choice but to respect it. And you can couch it with I know this is going to be difficult because you're used to me doing XYZ. However, One of my favorite books from a couple of years ago is Shonda Rhimes' The Year of Yes. And my favorite chapter was when she broke it down and said her year of yes was really the year of no. And so once you learn how to start setting healthy boundaries, declining opportunities that you know you don't have the time and space or interest in, the bandwidth to take on. And a lot of us struggle with saying no. So we can even coming up with little phrases, you know, I'll get back to you, or let me refer you to somebody else, or, you know, maybe not right now, you know, check back with me in, 3 months or something like that. You can play around with the language based upon, again, your personality and your relationship with the person. But all of those kind of communication strategies are going to be different depending on who you're sending the message to.
Absolutely. And, before we get to, we'll go right into the professional space. So in, reacting in the home, reacting with our personal friends and our extended family, when it comes to the workplace, we probably don't react the same. So how do we create boundaries at work or in the workspace as it relates to possibly the boundaries of maybe when you are being overworked, when you are overwhelmed with tasks or assignments, or you feel like you're being stretched thin. Things happen, in the workspace now. There may be people who are covering 2 jobs because the company or organization needs to hire someone, and in the meantime, people are having to chip into this full-time position's responsibility and take some of the workload. What suggestions would you have in advocating for yourself in that space?
Yeah, bouncing off of Dr. Shea's last point that she made, one piece of professional advice I received is to come up with a no committee, right? So these might be mentors in your field, coworkers, people that you look up to in your career to help you kind of suss out opportunities or requests that you receive to see whether or not maybe this is a no, or maybe is this an opportunity that would behoove me to take in light of my professional goals. And I thought that was really helpful because we should have that multi-layered support within our professional lives. And then that gives us some checks and balances, when we're feeling kind of stressed. It having that pause that Dr. Shea mentioned ensures that we're not being reactive, right? So a reactive yes or no when maybe it wasn't fully thought through. So I thought that was a really great concrete professional strategy that we could probably all employ.
And again, just like we want to understand and appreciate the cultural significance of kind of the role, we want to understand the other nuances of the work environment. I mean, the reality is we're probably doing other people's jobs and maybe getting paid less. We're probably filling in where other people are slacking off. We're probably training somebody who may be in a different position and maybe, our superior later. And so I think, again, the systems that get set from the communication standpoint and work can be a little bit more awkward because of all of those layers and maybe certain people's ignorance or lack of awareness or lack of care. Whereas if we're setting boundaries with our friends and our family, there's this personal relationship and at least the benefit of the doubt that we have this bond. And so you kind of have to ask yourself in the work environment, whether you're talking about a school system, a corporate setting, a medical setting, a law, whatever. It's always negotiating the risk and the benefit. You may need to explore a different position or different opportunities or a different department, and all of that is tough, right? It's easier said than done. Especially in this, era of the pandemic, when on the one hand, there are so many jobs, but on the other hand, there's so much void and lack and people are overwhelmed anyway. But sometimes you may need to make a tough decision. And I know plenty of people that have taken a position for maybe less salary because it was an increase in peace of mind, or they totally resigned or changed position for that same reason, or went to that supervisor, that dean, that principal, that, corporate head person to really, kind of speak in a way that gets them to wake up, because they too may be set to, oh, I know you're the one I can depend on. You can take care of this. And sometimes you have to, just really kind of wake people up after you've realized certain things about yourself. But it can be even more difficult, again, in that corporate or work, employment environment, because you may not have those personal connections and that level of kind of mutual respect and affiliation and bond.
Absolutely. And, what if, this idea, the expectation in your workplace is that the Black women do everything, and you're new and you come into this space and you're having to either decide to assume this expectation that's unspoken, but you can tell by the interactions that as another Black woman in this space, you're expected to do everything, and kind of feel like you're an imposter because you're new and maybe you don't want to do everything. You only want to do your job that you were hired for. And how to fight through, and maybe fight is not the right word, but how to navigate the expectations that are placed on Black women in the workplace, because it can be, it can pull on your ego for someone, your boss, to tell you, I really appreciate you. You're the only one that really gets stuff done around here. And you may be the only Black woman in the space that type of compliment is being given. How do you navigate that? And, but also want to keep a good reputation, keep your job, develop working relationships that could be lasting. It's a very sticky space. Any kind of thoughts or suggestions in that?
Absolutely, that's tough. It's like that feeling of being stuck, right? And when we feel stuck, there are kind of two options: is change or coping, right? So Dr. Shea spoke to change. So whether or not looking for other opportunities makes the most sense, or if staying in the current space makes the most sense, how do we cope within that space? And that's where we look to things like social support. So are there other coworkers where you all can have a good vent session or a group chat or something to keep you all going throughout the week, right? And then to celebrate each other at the end of the week, right? So really having that support system built in, the strategies that you use to de-stress outside of work, right? So what calms down your nervous system? What healthy ways do you calm down your nervous system so that you can feel refreshed to then re-enter that environment, right? So it's that radical self-care, right? If you're having to cope and there aren't a lot of options for change, what does radical self-care look like for you, and how do you go for it 100%?
And sometimes it's also learning how to advocate for yourself in a new way and educate other people. I will say that over the past couple of years, just because of everything with, racial injustice coming to the forefront and all of these corporations wanting to, determine if they're an ally and what that means and how that looks, it's a great opportunity to educate people, whether it's kind of indirect and sending an article about something such as this, or if you have a DEI committee at work and, bringing up a training session idea or suggestion, or again, going to that direct supervisor, boss, person in charge, committee of sorts to just really talk about the cultural climate and the experiences, because sometimes people really don't know, and they operate under implicit bias and assumptions, and that education piece can often, if they care enough, prompt the change on the opposite side as you are trying to change in learning how to advocate for yourself. And that might be something like a negotiation, whether it be negotiating a salary increase or wage increase, negotiating taking something else off of your plate. Oftentimes in academia, this comes up where, if you're supposed to teach X amount of classes or have X amount of students, but they want you on 15 committees, sometimes you have to kind of speak up and say, oh, well, when I look at my time, this is how much I'm spending on X, Y, Z, and now you're asking me to do this. So who's going to do this? Figuring out a way and a space and a time to advocate for yourself in that way, to kind of put it out there. Like, there's only so many hours in the day, in the week, you know, and making it figuring out how to make it a win-win for you.
And I think, you know, both of you definitely mentioned in advocating and communicating and speaking up. One of the things that has been helpful to me, which is what Dr. Thomas just shared, is in asking for help, laying out the facts. So I'm devoting time to this. I have time to do this. I'm doing this. And you're asking me to do another, you know, another task. Is there someone that can help me with one of these other ideas or tasks that, you know, that you can, you know, can I partner with someone? So it could be in advocating, you're also providing an opportunity, a solution at the same time to also get your help that you need, instead of succumbing to saying yes to all of the requests. You know, there's a question that came up in the chat in reference to working on, you know, the idea, the concept, you know, we're kind of coming out of COVID and everyone working from home, and this idea that every day can be a work day. How do we get back to or normalize or set boundaries as it relates to what are the days that you're going to work, and then the days that you're not working, or the expectation that you're not working, setting boundaries around that.
Sure, absolutely. We're learning a lot about this new nature of work, aren't we? I mean, with work from home, there's no natural break in the day, right? So there's no closing the computer and then the commute home that provides a natural break for dinner and family time and all of those things. It's very easy to just work through the night, right? So then that puts the onus on us to set those boundaries and then stick with them. So back to all the things that we've talked about today. So figuring out what feels like a natural boundary in your work day, right? So is it a lunchtime? Is it around mealtime? Maybe when your kids get home, that's a natural break, right? That you say, you know, at this point, I'm going to greet my kids and see how their day was. Maybe we start dinner and then I return. Like, so what does that look like? And then make that a habit. Again, I think that intentionality piece is really important there.
And there's so many things that you can explore in terms of figuring out how to sustain yourself, working virtually, working online, and then also setting boundaries within the home. Do you have the right chair? You know, do you have the right distance between the height of where, you know, are you working on a desktop or a laptop? Do you have dual monitors? Is your, you know, do you need to put on your glasses sometimes instead of your contacts, or vice versa? Do you need to change the lighting? So there are things that you can do to sustain yourself, so that the things that maybe we don't pay attention to that's wearing on our body, and they catch up with us and comes out in different ways, we can try to improve that. But we can also do things like close the laptop, unplug it, put it in the bag, take it off of the table, kind of like we do our kids with the phone when they, you know, like this all the time, but we want to set that boundary. We can do that for ourselves, and figure out how to, you know, put our phones down at a certain time, or, you know, like I said, close the laptop. I oftentimes will, and I've had to go learn this myself, again, just teaching online for so many years off and on. I try not to relax and work in the same space, or I play around with different environments, so that, you know, sometimes it works for me to have this, like, I'm always at this part of the table, but then sometimes, again, if I want to go outside, or if I want to switch to a desk or a different room, you know, play around with it to see what works for you, because sometimes getting stuck in the monotony can kind of reinforce something that may not be as optimal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, and I would say demands from work to work on certain days, you know, for me, I have leaned a lot on what my contract states, or what my, you know, job description is indicating, because it's written not just with the idea, okay, we need this role, but there is an idea of how many days a person would need to work to fulfill this responsibility. And maybe, you know, playing around with, or not playing around, but offering some days that, you know, if you're being asked to come in to work on days that you normally don't work, that would be a great time to negotiate. Okay, I can come in on these days, but then I'm going to need these days off. And really, that's setting a boundary that you can make yourself available, but what you're not going to do is deplete your personal free time either. You can move that, you can be flexible, but there has to be a give and take with that. You know, so we've talked about this idea of how this can affect our bodies, this level of stress, but we hadn't had a chance to get into what can one feel when we are exhausted, when we are stressed, when we are overwhelmed. That could help with signs for a person to say, let me stop because I'm experiencing this, and I remember this session, and this is not a good thing. Let me stop. This is a time for me to stop and check and do self-checks and maybe do some things differently.
Absolutely. So I think I mentioned earlier, so that this change from your usual functioning, right? So changes in sleep and appetite are often indicators that the body is overly stressed. Changes in cognitive function, so difficulty concentrating, difficulty doing all the things that you used to do, etc. Now, the research does say that Black women, Black people in particular, are less likely to show the typical signs of mental health concerns because we're so good at keeping it going, right? So that as a clinician, that's, you know, that's tricky. That makes my work a little bit harder because we're not seeing these typical signs. So then what, right? So that requires more internal self-checks on our part, right? And oftentimes slowing down. Oftentimes we're so good at going so quickly and keeping the status quo, we're not checking in with our bodies, right? So if we're able to slow down, then that's maybe where we see the signs and symptoms that maybe we need to recalibrate a little bit. So we talk about mindfulness a lot. That can look like pausing and taking a quick breath or a couple of breaths. It could be a body scan, so a quick check of your body systems, right? So does my back feel tight? Do I have a headache? Have I eaten today? Am I thirsty? Right? So just that quick stop to check in with how your body's doing can go a long way in being able to pick up those symptoms when we're so good at just kind of pushing through.
Absolutely. And oftentimes tracking what your normal is can help you recognize when things are a little bit differently. So do you know how many hours of sleep your body needs to feel rested and rejuvenated? Do you know how many hours, how much time you're spending on your phone or looking at the screen? Do you track your water intake? And then the relational things, you know, are you a little bit more irritable and snappy with people than you once were? Are kind of little things setting you off? Are you withdrawn and isolated, not from the standpoint of trying to rejuvenate yourself and enjoy some solitude, but like, I just can't take it anymore. And that, again, that concerning withdrawal and isolation. Are you not enjoying things that you once enjoyed? Are you avoiding certain people in certain situations? Are you having physiological symptoms going on that have not yet been explored or maybe can't be explained? You know, Dr. Joya mentioned headaches. You know, are you having stomach aches? Are you having gastrointestinal problems? Is your skin breaking out? Like our body talks to us. And I regularly tell people, you know, we have to learn how to listen to our body when it whispers, so we won't be forced to listen to it when it screams. And so it is important to know yourself through and through so that you can recognize when something is different. Because again, if we're wearing this Superwoman mask and cape and all of that, then we have this cloak where we're trying to pretend, or maybe we don't know that we are you know, a little bit more vulnerable physically? Are you getting your blood pressure checked? Are you making time to get your annual physicals, your annual PAP, your mammogram? I mean, all of those things, you know, as much as we're hustling and bustling for other people, are we putting ourselves on our schedule?
Absolutely. Now, could our spouses, or even it could even be older children that are more aware, but could our family be a place that we can ask questions about if they think mommy is stressed, you know, or ask, you know, when mommy is stressed, what does mommy do, to kind of maybe as a reflective opportunity, because we maybe don't know, as Dr. Anderson mentioned, we operate in high stress all the time. So when we're not stressed, that probably feels very, very uncomfortable. So how, you know, could we use our family to kind of ask some questions to help us to think and identify behaviors or emotions when it's a time for us to take time for ourselves?
Absolutely. I do this regularly with my couple and family sessions, just kind of get people to do some perspective taking and sharing. And I will sometimes ask, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is you're coping the best, the most optimal, you're doing what you need to do, what number would you give yourself? And then, of course, we have a conversation about what that means, because the number means different things to different people. And then I may say, like, if you had to give your loved one a number, is that the, you know, is that would you have given it this, you know, they said a 7, and somebody might be like, I would have said 4, you know, or or vice versa. You know, they might give their loved one an 8, and then the person acknowledges, again, feels comfortable being vulnerable and says, I'm a, you know, a 4 or a 5. So that really is a great way to open the door to a conversation about what people are noticing about each other. And again, an opportunity to self-check to see what we're projecting, what we're portraying rather. I think it depends on your relationship with your family. It also depends on, of course, if you're talking about your children, your parenting style. It definitely is different. You know, some people might call it like the new age parenting or whatever, where you're asking your kids, you know, how's mommy doing? Or, you know, do you have any, you know, feedback that you want to give me? But I think in this day and age, it's so important, and it models for them that it's okay to acknowledge that about people I love, but also about myself when I'm not feeling my best, and to hear when they notice something about me as well.
Thank you. And you know, what if you're, you know, you're married and both you and your husband are stressed or overwhelmed? How do you support one another when you're both at the space of possibly both being depleted at the same time?
Sure. Well, this comes up in my work. This comes up the most where it comes to parent work. So parent training work, parenting sessions where I'm working with the couple in service of parent training skills for their youth who might be experiencing mood concerns. And oftentimes when the parental unit is taxed, that often comes out in the parenting, and they're not on the same page, which makes the parenting even more difficult, right? So I also encourage those self-checks that Dr. Shea alluded to, right? So in doing the self-checks, so you're checking in with yourself first, that you can then check in with your spouse to see where you all are. And if you're not on the same page, how can you quickly recalibrate for the sake of the children, right? And that could look like a really small behavioral change in the moment to get the parenting intervention finished, or it could look like more sustainable change, right? So maybe there's more individual time with you and your spouse to rebuild the foundation of the relationship in best service of the parenting. That could look a lot of different ways. So there are short-term changes and then long-term changes that I think could go towards that goal.
Great. And in reference to parenting, Dr. Anderson, we have a participant who has a toddler and is I'm assuming, yes, her and her husband have a toddler, and she puts a lot on herself because she has the routine down packed with the toddler. And so that typically leaves dad kind of able to chill So this idea of how does a mom get to a point of being at peace and letting go to kind of share this parental responsibility across the board?
Absolutely. I think that's embracing good enough. Good enough, right? So although your nighttime routine is probably excellent, right? I'm sure husband can also get it done.
Yes.
Good enough.
Yes.
Right, where it is completed, right? And so allowing again, that word flexibility, where can we embrace good enough now so that you have something off of your plate and you're able to pour into yourself. That way you are stronger and more refreshed to do the next parenting thing. Right. So yeah, that's one of my favorite terms, and I'm trying to hold on to again myself. Good enough.
Yes. Absolutely.
And knowing what each other's strengths are, there are some wonderful, dads and fathers out there. So I don't want to give the men a bad rap, like they, can't do it as well as we do, but sometimes we don't give them a chance. And sometimes we think the right way has to be our way. And so figuring out how we have to accept, sometimes good enough because maybe we know we do it better and more efficient and more timely and all of that, but also different can be equal and better in a different way. Maybe you're really good at washing the hair, and maybe they can pack the lunch or wash the dishes, or, so figuring out what each other's strengths are and what the kind of energy or reserve is in that moment. But again, I think it's all about how and when you communicate that. Nobody's going to be receptive if you're, griping and, fussing and raising your voice all the time. But also, I think sometimes we have to do a better job of not expecting people to read our minds and know what we want or need. And just because you've been married or somebody's partner for 15, 20 years doesn't mean they're going to know what you need or want in the moment, because it might even change for yourself. And so that's why that openness and that communication is so important, so that you don't assume and that you don't, just follow a pattern, and maybe you guys need to, change the narrative or rewrite the story or change the rules.
Absolutely. And for our next question, and just in kind of going back into relationships, we have a participant that asked a question in reference to kind of being the main person that made sure everybody is taken care of. And this participant is now in a space where she's getting out and dating, and how to navigate the space of I've been the person to have to take care of everything, and how do I consider bringing someone into my life that I can follow and allow them to lead me, or allow them to do things for me that I normally do for myself, can be uncomfortable, and can be a habit that now it worked for in one situation or in one space of life, and now it's not working.
Dr. Shea, would you like to start with your and I'll jump in?
Yeah, so I think that, again, knowing, that's the beauty of and I say beauty, I know I have the luxury of being married right this moment, but I remember, and I have friends and family and everything in between, and it just is so scary, but it can also be so exciting, exploring, and again, knowing what you want out of a relationship and being able to communicate that, but also knowing what the other person brings to the table and what you all are willing to negotiate. You may find a partner that, loves and respects the fact that you want to do XYZ and you have been doing XYZ. But if you want something to be different, maybe you've always, done this or done that, but you would really like it if, your new partner did XYZ. Are you clear on that? And how have you communicated that? And vice versa. I think it works the same way. If we want to jump on stereotypical gender roles, again, figuring out, who's going to cook, who's going to clean, who's going to wash the dishes, change the tires, all of that. We come in because of our family history and our relationship history with so many schemas and norms and values about gender roles and things of that nature. And we really have to explore what's going to work for this relationship. And being a partner is about exploring what's going to work for your relationship, not your mama's, not your grandmama's, not your sister and your brother and your friend down the street, but something might work differently for you and your relationship than everyone else, or something you read on a book or saw on a movie.
Absolutely. I think the attendee who asked this question said it really well. So it's not serving you anymore. So figuring out what is no longer serving you. And then once you have that awareness, and we've agreed on that, right? Then what is the change, right? So, and again, change can be uncomfortable, but that's okay, right? You know what your goal is, right? You're trying to put behind what is no longer serving you and trying something different for a life that feels a little bit more sustainable to you. So I work with clients up to age 26. So I work, with a lot of young adults, and talking about relationships and dating comes up a lot. And we also talk a lot about boundaries and expectations around relationships, like Dr. Shea outlined. I think that's very important to know at the outset, and to continue to check back in on as you move through the dating process.
And I like how you said that. Is this behavior serving me well? It gets back into this continuous space of evaluating yourself and really looking at yourself, because the behaviors that you may have had in your 20s may not serve you very well in your 30s. And in your 30s, you may have behaviors that you do that don't serve you very well in your 40s, and it's okay to change. And both of you mentioned this idea that we are going to continue to change, and that's a part of this humanness that we have. We have our last two questions, and I am going to, one is in reference to the gender division of labor in the home, and learning how to, or not learning, but how to get to the space of achieving better synergy between the responsibilities in the home and the individuals that live in the home. So whether that is chores, whether that's inside the home, chores outside the home, in addition to schoolwork or homework or regular work. Any suggestions or guidance as it relates to approaching better synergy when both individuals have a physical and mental load of taking care of the home, but jumping in to take care of everything is overwhelming. And so, or one person jumping in to do everything is or even expected is overwhelming. And then our last question is about therapy, and so we'll save that for the end.
Yeah, I think that, again, it's about exploring each person's skill set and time and capacity to do XYZ. I always think it's ideal in relationships if you talk about some of these things when you're, dating or early on. I know that does not always happen, but talking about things like gender roles and finances and sex and parenting style, that's very important as you're cultivating a relationship and partnering with one another. And as things come up, then you may have the just spot on opportunity to kind of go into that, well, I grew up, seeing XYZ, so I always preferred or thought blah, 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 what are your thoughts? What do you think works for us? And there's so many things that can be life-changing. I have worked in an outpatient rehabilitation setting, and gender roles kind of go out of the door when somebody is injured. And so I've had people on both sides do things that were kind of stereotypically the other person's job. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to kind of, again, understand the responsibilities and the demand of a household in general, but also what you're modeling, if you have children, what you're modeling for your children in terms of going against, going against the grain as it relates to things that we kind of put in a box. And I will say, you can still honor certain gender roles. And if your partner does, that's fine. And then you're going to have to decide again what you're teaching and how you're training your children. But again, I think it goes back to kind of negotiating and partnering to figure out what works for you at that moment because of the time, the circumstances, the money, the energy, the health, the so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Thank you. And our last question is, what are your suggestions for getting the most valuable experience out of individual and family therapy services if healthy communication and self-evaluation have been things missing from your household during childhood or adolescence? So I'm assuming that that could be either an adult that didn't have foundational healthy coping or communication skills or experiences, or a parent of a child or adolescent wanting to instill some healthy communication skills.
I think it's really important to seek a provider with the appropriate background and expertise for your concern. So a lot of the time, some of our behaviors are develop out of trauma, right? So a lot of behaviors that develop out of trauma that can no longer serve us, right? So an expert in treating different types of trauma. There's relational trauma that's most relevant to this question, but other adverse childhood experiences can set the foundation for how we approach life later on. I think there's also, if the question, has to do with the family system, so interactions between parent and child, a family therapist might be the expert who would come in and be able to help you navigate those concerns, right? So I think when you're looking for individual and family therapists, really doing your research is what it comes down to, making sure they have that background, and then asking appropriate questions at the outset to make sure that they might be able to provide what you're looking for out of your therapy experience.
And also, I think not being afraid, let's say you are 2 or 3 sessions in with somebody and you're just not really feeling it and you can't quite put your finger on it, but it's not meeting you or your family's needs. I think it's okay to say that. Therapists learn from feedback and can hopefully adjust and accommodate. Yes, we are all trained in different things and have a number of different types of experiences. Some people do have a specialty and kind of the vast majority of their clients are all about this. And then some people see all kinds of clients, but it's okay. And it's usually welcomed to give your therapist feedback about what's working and what's not. And at the same time, you want to have a therapist or a counselor who is skilled in and comfortable with talking about some of the cultural nuances that we're talking about. Understanding how your family of origin played in, or your past relationship, or your work hat versus your personal hat kind of plays into your personality style, your communication, and not being afraid to kind of get in there. Also, because things are usually, communication is usually a pattern. I think as clients, we have to remember that the change process is just that, a process. You're not going to have 1 or 2 sessions and overnight everybody's just exactly how you want them to be, including you. But it's going to take some time and practice and exploration. And sometimes you leave therapy and you don't necessarily feel better. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean therapy isn't working. It just means that you're kind of working through some things and exploring the areas of discomfort, hopefully to get to a place where you're coming out better on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I always say when you're uncomfortable, you can either have a new experience, choose to have a new experience by a new behavior, or you can choose to have the same experience by resorting to maybe that same behavior. And so it's an opportunity that's presented itself to you. And as you both mentioned, advocating for yourself in the space of finding a therapist is also a good place to practice. If you're one that has trouble communicating with other people honestly, please feel free to honestly share your thoughts and your feelings with your therapist, even if it's someone that you that's not meshing well with you, your synergy is not on the same wavelength. That information is not only very helpful to the therapist, but it's also very empowering for you to practice that skill and for yourself. Self-advocacy is important because you are the only one that is expert at you, and you communicate yourself to other people so that they can learn more about you. So thank you both for that. I see that we don't have any more questions, but we do have a few more minutes, and I did want to ask, what can we do if we see our friends, our girlfriends, our sister moms that may, you know, have a hard time wearing our cape? How can we support other women that, you know, we're all in this space of still learning ourselves, still having our own individual struggles, and being okay with, I'm a human being and I have my capabilities go to a certain point. But we also are here that can be encouraging and supporting for each other. And so just kind of a last, you know, any few words as it relates to supporting other women in this space, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, or whether it's in, you know, your children, maybe, you know, daughters that are having to be, you know, Mrs. High School this, or, you know, on the captain of the cheerleading squad, or, you know, how can we support one another in this space?
Sure. I think validation is such a powerful tool. So a lot of the times people just want to feel seen and understood, right? So even if it's just reflecting back that you understand where they're coming from, maybe you've experienced something similar and you see that they're working really hard, that can really go a long way. I'll also note that, you know, encouraging individuals to seek additional support if it might be helpful. So sometimes seeking out a therapist can be a really difficult step. So maybe volunteering to kind of help them look for therapists, or sitting with them while they make that phone call can make that journey feel a lot less scary.
Absolutely. And just like we kind of ask our girlfriends or our family or our coworkers, you know, like, where do you get your hair done? Where do you get your clothes clean? You know,
Yes.
it's okay to say, you know, where do you go to therapy, or to talk about your therapist. I think sometimes in our field, you know, this is not a popular opinion, we've kind of set up this dynamic where confidentiality and privacy has turned into secrecy, and we have the responsibility to honor that and to not share client information with others. But as a larger society and a community, it's okay to talk about going to therapy, having a therapist, what you're learning in therapy, recommendations for a therapist. And then on a very practical level, just learning how to set boundaries and say, you know, hey girl, I love you, but look, we've been on the phone for an hour and a half and I really have to go cook dinner, or I'm so tired, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Setting boundaries and understanding that it's not a personal attack. It's not, you know, they don't want to be your girl anymore and don't have your back, you know, finding little ways and opportunities to do that for one another, and doing self-checks, you know, even little things, you know, go somewhere without wearing makeup, or without feeling like you always have to have your nails done or be picture perfect, or, you know, you display your mistakes and give yourself some grace. You know, those are practical ways that you kind of take off that cape or take off that vest little by little, so that you are not reinforcing that unrealistic expectation.
Thank you so very much. And Dr. Thomas, to piggyback on what you said, I actually had an opportunity this week to be natural with my nails. Unexpected, it wasn't planned. And, but I was like, I'm gonna paint my fingernails. And, you know, I had a moment to reflect. I said, boy, I feel like I'm in 1987 having to paint my nails like by myself. And, you know, but it definitely was an opportunity just to, you know, see me in the raw, right, an opportunity. So thank you for that. Thank you both for being here. We have our president of our chapter that is going to say our last words, provide our closing for us. And I'm going to give you the floor, Sora Sabrina Clark.
Thank you so much. And wow, as we all suspected, tonight's webinar definitely did not disappoint. I think everyone in attendance has probably probably at some point, whether it's in the past, currently, or possibly in the future, will play that role of Superwoman, whether we choose to play the role of Superwoman or life just kind of tells us we have to be Superwoman. And I think one of the things that was just so apparently obvious, out of tonight's discussion is that it really is okay to give ourselves a pass and just know when to say no. Yeah, I mean, it really is okay to say no, or it is okay, even if you know the answer, you know what, maybe just not give the answer and let them go figure it out themselves, as opposed to always coming back to you. As Nadia said, I am Sabrina Clark and I'm the chapter president. And I really hope that you enjoyed tonight's webinar and found the answers to maybe some of the questions, or some of the thoughts that you've actually had. Once again, we want to say thank you to Dr. Joya and to Dr. Shea for sharing your expertise and insight. And it was really awesome, and a good compliment to have both of you on the same panel, with this discussion. I think I heard one of the guests, one of the guests made a comment in the chat box, and she said that she feels like her family thinks that she is Google and they come to her for everything, and when I saw that, I laughed. But when we think about how many times, friends, family, your neighbors, they, if they feel like, you're a good resource, they will come to you, and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to Google and give you the answer. So guess what? You could actually do the same thing. Like, I don't, just say, we just need to all figure out how to just say no sometimes. I think you just feel almost compelled to just want to help everyone. That's kind of where that, that S, you almost put the S on your chest sometimes, just because we don't know when to say no. And so I think one of the other things that I heard, and I heard it a couple of times, is we probably all have to learn how to set boundaries, which is okay, and to provide clear communication on those boundaries. And just like I think Nadia said, you realize you walked past your dad to come ask me that question. So guess what? Go back and ask your dad. I'm not answering that question. And I think it's okay. And she was clear with her communications. You passed your dad. Go back to your dad and ask him that question. So once again, thank you to both of you for joining us this evening. For anyone that may have joined us late this evening, you can definitely, or if you'd like to share the replay, you can find the replay of this webinar and any of our other Mental Health Monday series on our ASAC YouTube channel. As always, please join us next month on the third Monday of the month, which would be the 16th at the same time, 6:30. And the topic will be racial trauma with Dr. Erica Lee, who is a licensed psychologist, and Dr. Nanette Kenneth, who is a licensed adult and adolescent psychiatrist. Thank you again for joining us this evening. To all of our attendees, we do value your input, so please take a couple of minutes to complete the survey. And in closing, I really would just like to say, have a great evening and feel free to snatch the S off of your chest and maybe grab a glass of wine and get in bed early, or earlier than you typically would. And so, Sarah Barnett, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. And we hope that you all have a wonderful evening. Good night.